All right, but it's my class, the rich class. That's making war, and we're winning. Warren Buffett.
Welcome to Analyzing Finance with Nick. We're going back to the old money topic because it seems to have hit a nerve with the audience here. And instead of doing a specific question about old money, their allegiances, why they operate the way they do, I think it's more important this time to zoom out and just explain really just the history of class warfare and what is class warfare going to look like in the 21st century and why recent technological developments are going to drastically shift how the class hierarchy is constructed all over the world. In the pre-modern era, the class structure was pretty simple. You had an old money ruling class who had gained their position by force, usually conquest. You had an enforcer class. In this example, this would be like knights in the medieval era. And the job of the enforcer class is really to hold down the vast majority of the population, which were either in the slave class or the peasants or serfs or whatever you want to call them, but they're the people who were either undercompensated or not compensated at all to do the bulk of the work that kept the economy and the food supply growing. And then you had free citizens, which I guess the closest thing to this would be the middle class in today's society, or people who were not tied to a piece of land or to the debts of the wealthy. They're usually skilled artisans or proto-professional jobs, or the clergy, or others who just weren't really tied to the previous system but still participated in the system and had relative autonomy. But their numbers were very small, and they were so far away from the halls of power that they really didn't have a chance to move up. And in honesty, since they just were less organized and communication technology was limited, you had a lot of rogues outside the system, whether it's just bandits or marauders or traveling salesmen or whatever. They just didn't really participate in the classic class structure, nomadic peoples, and they were in the periphery of the civilization, and they kind of just lived outside the system. They could cause disruptions in the short term through violent interference with the civilization, but they were either, in the long run, either assimilated in or pushed aside. And that's really how, up until basically the French Revolution, how most class structures worked across the world. Then you started to have revolutions where, due to the advancement of weapons technology and literacy, the lower classes had more access to power and more direct ways to threaten the established elite, especially violently. And so as a result, this old pre-modern structure fell apart. And what effectively replaced it was one of two solutions. First, you had more class warfare between the lower classes, where you had the elites split into two sides, and you would have one align their interests with the middle class, and one side of elites align themselves with the working and lower classes. And this class conflict between the middle class and the working class allowed these groups to fight amongst each other and distract the fact that the hierarchy still remains relatively intact. This is kind of how the American social hierarchy worked, I would say, from the American Revolution up until the fall of the Berlin Wall. The old world, on the other hand, either stayed in the pre-modern framework or switched to either the authoritarian framework, which I discussed in a previous video, or the European style class hierarchy, which I also discussed in a previous video, which basically used a combination of high progressive taxation and a high social safety net to create a relatively high floor of standard of living to pacify most of the population into a very large lower middle class that lives comfortably and is generally satisfied with their lives, but at the same time really has no means to move up into the elite. Some emerging markets who are in the process of democratizing are kind of in a transitional phase between the pre-modern class model and the American or European class models, and they're kind of ironing out the challenges of that, and I did a video about that one too. However, really, the thing that's the game changer, which is going to change all of these, is the development of robotics and AI technology that has really started to accelerate starting with the release of ChatGPT at the end of December 2022 and the development of Mobile Aloha by Google on the humanoid robot side to do a lot of physical, domestic, and other types of physical labor that's going to be replaced by machines. And the thing is that what makes this a game changer is not necessarily that the robots are going to immediately replace everybody and that could not be other possibly jobs created, like, for example, people to maintain the robots. However, there now is a path to do that very thing. And if you are the old money and the upper tiers of the system and you do not need people anymore to do the work and keep the economy running and all of your goods and services operating, then the relationship between the classes changes drastically. The main issue that the old money and the established and elite are always afraid of is being overthrown by the lower classes. However, they still need the lower classes because who's going to do the work that keeps society running? And so this tension, whether to maintain position versus keeping the lower classes satisfied enough that they do not rebel and still participate in the system, is the balancing act that societies have had to do really since agriculture created settled societies. Now, however, with technology can replace both the white-collar middle classes and the working classes that do more physical work, that social contract and that balancing act no longer needs to be balanced. Within a few generations, you can replace most of the work. You may not be able to replace everything, and you still need people to innovate and advance, but if you want to have a stable society with no threat of rebellion, you get rid of that threat by replacing all the people with machines. But it will be a step-by-step basis. Like, it's not going to be overnight. Let's say the first generation, 20 years from now, when you have AI and robotics get to a competent level, what would the class structure eventually evolve in? The first step would be just the removal of mobility. That's why there's more gaps in these charts than the previous ones. You will have the old money and the politicians still at the top, like the European model. However, instead of the lower middle class, you're going to have the dependent class, which are people whose jobs have been disrupted away from robotics and AI. And then you have the bottom of the hierarchy, which will be the robots and the AI doing all the work. The dependent class will be collecting a portion of the economy, whether it's through machine taxes or income taxes on the elites, to pay for the subsistence of the dependent class. And through and that is really how it would be in the first generation. You'll get them comfortable enough, again, not to rebel, but given the fact that most economic opportunity is really going to not be there, it's hard to get on the ladder if every entry-level job is done by a machine. And eventually, as AI develops, most advanced jobs will also be done by the machine. So really, if you're a business owner, you'll have AI doing most of what you need to do. You just have to sign a few things on DocuSign every day, and that will allow the old money to live their lives at leisure, while at the same time having a more direct control and operation of the means of production. Then you have to look into the next one, the end generation. If you just keeps going, you're going to basically have the dependent class is basically going to go extinct. I mean, however, everybody's going to participate in this. There will be rogues outside the system who either build their own independent communities or just kind of drift around, but are not large enough in members to threaten the existing hierarchy. I mean, this is going to take several generations, and if you look at current demographic trends and technological advancement, this is really the scenario that you could eventually get. And the thing is that's scary is it looks very similar to the pre-modern hierarchy that I mentioned before, except without the enforcers, because you won't really need to have physical enforcers to enforce the robots. They will do what they're supposed to do via hard-coded instructions. So am I saying that AI in 20 years is going to basically turn everybody into welfare dependents and gradually die out. No, this is probably going to be a 200-year process. However, if I was the old money, and if my goal was to maintain power and eliminate challenges yet still maintain my life of luxury, the best way to do that is not to continue the class conflict. The way to win the class war is to replace the lower classes with technology and make them obsolete and outcompeted by technological selection, for a lack of a better term. I know this sounds a little bit crazy, but that could be the end game, and that is the dark side possibly of the advancement of AI technology. Those who are in the counter classes and the challenger classes are going to be increasingly challenged on how to stay relevant, and if they can stay relevant in other ways, or AI's development is a lot further away than many people anticipate. Instead of this being a 1 to 200 year process, this could be a 3 to 500 year process, or maybe some other game-changing technology such as space travel or other major innovations that will provide a role for people beyond what the AI can do. The implications are staggering. And the other really thing is, let's just say, what if the technology becomes like any other enforcer class and eventually rebels against the old money masters? Maybe that's why we haven't really had contact with alien life. Those are my thoughts on this. Let me know what you think. Is AI really going to be the nail in the coffin that kills the middle and lower classes? Is it going to be the killer app that ultimately allows old money and established elites to win the millennia-long class war? Or are there some elements that I'm missing? Or a hidden weapon that the counter elites and the challenger classes can do to take back control of the post-AI economy? Like, subscribe, share. If you disagree, please leave a comment. And if you agree, also leave a comment. And thank you for watching.